Before the camera started, Calvin said, people will wonder what we're doing. People always wonder what we're doing. They never know where we're going to be. We may be on the Altona Flat Rock. We might be at the Remington Museum in Ogdensburg. We may be at Bolt Castle on the Thousand Islands. We may be talking to our friend Leonard Snow in Osable Forks. We might be doing some programs on the Battle of Plattsburgh and the War of 1812. But today it's Old Home Day. We're at 4 Marcy Lane, not too far from Adirondack Lane, one of the first places I ever lived when I came to Plattsburgh. Memorable for me because I met my wife just right over that way and down the hill at the old Baker's Trailer Park. And we're not very far from Plattsburgh High School, just to give people an idea where we are. And we're at the home of Ben Morreale. How are you, Ben?
Okay, it's Ben Morreale, and
Morreale, okay.
That's
I
where,
want to say it right.
That's where Montreal gets its name from. Did you know that?
No, but I'll believe anything you tell me from this moment on.
In Palermo, there's a place that's called Morreale.
No kidding.
Above it, and the Jesuits came with the French. And when they said, we'll call it after our monastery, we'll call it Morreale. And that's where our name comes from. Morreale.
When he says it, it sounds so much better.
Morreale.
We've wanted to talk to Ben for a long, long time, and I don't know how he managed to escape us without even knowing he was escaping. But I got the word to him that we wanted to come over here very soon, and we chatted a few days ago. Actually, what's today? The 29th of September, 2000. A frost on the pumpkin this morning.
Yep.
My wife and I out last night with our blankets and sheets covering the tomato plants. How'd your flowers fare?
They're still going there.
He's got beautiful, it's a regular arboretum around here. The reason we're here is multifarious. I don't have any idea what that word means, but I like to throw in a big word to impress people at the beginning. Ben has been everywhere and done everything. And hopefully in the next hour and a half or so, we'll get to cover at least a third of those things. Not the least of which is his writing and his painting. How long have you been in Plattsburgh, Ben?
I came in 63.
2 years after I did.
Oh. I came from Goddard College, where I was teaching supposedly the French Revolution, but I wanted to get away from there, and I drew a circle in the area because I liked the area, and the first place I was interviewed here, and they said, well, you got the job if you want it. And that was 1963.
I don't know if that's serendipity or if there was a divine plan, or you never know about those things, do you? But you ended up here anyway. Had you ever visited Plattsburgh before?
No, I don't think so. I made the rounds of many of the colleges around here, but this was the first place that said, well, you got the job if you want it. And I came here to teach the French Revolution and European Civ and things of that sort. Then I also taught creative writing, and I taught mafia in America. I used to get all the hoodlums.
That sounds like my kind of subject.
I used to get all the hoodlums in the class. There you go. We won't talk about this. Let it go.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
I got some lovely term papers that I won't talk about.
I bet you did. That's a whole nother book, right?
Yeah.
So are you still teaching?
Every once in a while, I retired in '93, but every once in a while I teach the Italian-American experience. Essentially from my book La Storia, which is 500 years of the Italian-American experience. I'm giving a workshop at Clinton County sometime in November. I don't know when.
We'll find the date and tell our audience when time is. So you formally stopped teaching in 1993.
93, yeah. Yep.
Well, let's start. I want to look at some of the paintings here, first of all. When I said multifarious, I wasn't kidding. This guy has done lots of things. And this is painting is a great medium of expression. Have you been doing it for a long time?
Oh, yes. I started at Goddard. I do it on my own. In Europe, Bruno Caruso, who was this well-known painter, I said I wanted to go to art school. he said, "Go on, just keep painting." No, he never went to art school. None of these guys went to art school. But that scene there is of the town of Adamant in Vermont, where I lived when I was teaching at Goddard. It was a little town outside of Montpelier in Plainfield. And that town, Adamant, was in a film recently. I forget which one. They mentioned it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
All right,
I think it was East is East or something like that.
I don't know. Calvin's the movie. I very rarely watch movies. How about the next one?
That's not mine.
Okay.
This one is mine. It's the Sicilian town of Raccolmuto, where I was brought up as a kid. Although I was born in this country, I was taken back when I was young. And we used to go back and forth. My father would take us back. And that's the watering hole where the women wash their clothes. And that tower up there is the Norman castle. The Normans had conquered Sicily, and they occupied it for a long time. That's why you have many Norman names that are still in existence in Sicily. Like you have so-and-so Normanno and things of that sort now.
Wow.
This one is the steps of the Turks outside of Agrigento. When the Turks invaded, they would go up those steps, and they still call them La Scala delle Turchi.
Oh. And you said you lived over on this side, so that was your view.
Yep. You could see it.
Oh, that's great.
And this one, I think I told you, was...
well, tell me again on camera. This is neat. Explain this whole thing. Can you get a shot of it?
The ear of Dionysius. During the wars between Sparta and Athens, the Athenians were captured and put in there and left to starve. And this is outside of Syracuse in Sicily, Syracuse. And they left them to starve there, and you could hear their cries for help until they died all over the city. And that's why they call it the Dionysius ear.
And you now said there's a bridge over that so you can look down in?
Yeah, it's a tourist attraction now. I mean, this goes back to, 500 BC, these wars.
Oh, wow. Well, what a neat collection. How many paintings have you done all told, do you know?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't keep track.
You give them away, sell them, save them?
I save most of them. I have one up for sale over at Hava Java.
Oh, yeah. Hava Java, the great hangout in downtown Plattsburgh. That's wonderful. Do you do drawings too, or just paintings?
Yes, I do drawings, but I don't keep them. I just do them as an exercise, sort of. I like that.
You like oils better than everything?
I like that little flower pot I did there. That's one of my
let's
favorites.
Go look over in the corner. Yeah, we can mosey over there. I like that. You like to see things grow too, don't you? You got growing things all around in this place.
That's a little.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That I like very much.
I love it. You surround yourself with beautiful things all through your home here. I love it. It just feels cozy. How long have you lived over here?
Oh, just 2 years now, I think. Those are the paintings of Bruno Caruso, the well-known painter in Italy, who let me use his paintings for the covers of my books. That one was A Few Virtuous Men and Monday, Tuesday, Never Comes Sunday.
Talk about expression. Look at the faces.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I have a picture of him with me in the other room. I'll show it to you later.
Take a look at it. Yeah. Is he still living?
Yes, Bruno is, but Guttuso, the other one, I used to go out to have lunches with him when I lived in Rome. And I would like to have a glass of wine, but he was constantly drinking Jack Daniels. They had Jack Daniels, all they ever drank.
Ooh.
Well, that did him in.
That was it, huh?
Yeah. But these were well-known painters in Europe. They had magnificent homes. Bruno had a place overlooking the Colosseum, a studio.
Oh, well. If you're going to pick a spot, you might as well overlook the Coliseum, right?
It really was something.
Well, let's go back to the beginning just briefly and a little bit of your background. You were born where?
In Manhattan on Christie Street, right off of Mulberry Street there.
We're going to see a beautiful picture of that area on the cover and inside one of the books, as it undergoes an amazing colorization before it gets finished inside. So that lasted. How about your parents? Tell me a little bit about them.
Well, they came from this little town of Raccolmuto in Sicily. It's just outside of Agrigento. My father came when he was 10 years old. But then they married in this country. My grandfather was a sulfur mine owner in Sicily. Wow. They got into difficulty when they had a flood and the mine was destroyed, and that was one of the reasons the family came here. And then my father would go back often to see if he could rehabilitate the mine. And I went down to some of those mines. Those sulfur mines you had to walk down like this, and then when you got down there, the men were working naked except for a lion cloth around them. And they had young kids working in there, 10, 12 years old, to go into spots where no one else could go, And I began to understand why they left, Although they were owners of the mine, when it collapsed that way, they all came here. And my mother, they were married here, and then I was born on Christie Street.
Isn't that great? You lived there how long then before you moved?
Well, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and we went back to my father took us back to Sicily, and I stayed there for a while. Then I came back, and we lived in Brooklyn. We went out to the country, as they called it.
Yeah.
And then
there was still country in Brooklyn back then.
And then we went back again to Sicily when I was about 12 or 13. And I came back, I didn't know a word of English.
No kidding.
And I got I remember my mother took me to school with a birth certificate and get me into classes. And my name was Baltazar de Marco Morreale on the birth certificate.
What a name.
So Mrs. Cook, I still see her, a big tall woman, she said, "We'll call you Benny Morelli." And I was Benny Morelli until I got in the Army. I volunteered for the Air Force. The interesting thing was that I had about 14 hours flying in as an air cadet. I'll show you the picture later. They called me in. They said, "I understand you were in Italy during the fascist period." I said, "That wasn't Italy, it was Sicily, ha ha ha." I was washed out immediately.
Isn't that
Said that
amazing?
I had no aptitude towards flying. I was on a troop train with a bunch of other guys that had spent time in Germany or Italy. Where do you think we ended up? New Guinea. As far away as you can get from Italy. And I think that was really a mistake. I could have helped them, with the invasion of Sicily and all that. But then I went back to Sicily often after the war, and I saw that the American fighter pilots had strafed the city, the church, killed people. I don't think I could have done that.
Pretty tough, huh? Considering where your roots.
I knew the people. Yeah. So I spent the time in New Guinea and the Philippines.
Isn't that incredible? So then, let's go all the way through here. What after that? What?
Well, I came back, and that's with I think when people think of the GI Bill, what a terrific thing that was. I went right to college. I went to Brooklyn College, then Columbia, and when the Korean War broke out, Harry Carman, who was my professor at Columbia, he said, "Ben, why don't you go to Europe before they blow it up?" Because I was working on the French Revolution. And that's how I went to Europe. I registered at the Sorbonne, stayed there for 7 years.
Did you really?
Taught at the American School for a couple of years. But then I got in with those guys at the Paris Review, and I started writing.
When did you get your doctor's degree?
56, wasn't it?
There?
Yeah.
At the Sorbonne?
Yeah.
And now let's talk about this review. We're not going to gloss over this stuff. This is an exciting part of your history.
Yeah. You mean the Paris Review?
Yeah.
Well, we all used to hang out at a place called the Tournon. I remember seeing Richard Wright playing a pinball machine all the time. Click, 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 click. Evan Cannell was there, who recently won a prize for achievement. It was in the New York Times. And George Plimpton, of course, was the publisher of the Paris Review. And I would wander around with my friend Max Steele, who was there, another writer from who's in Chapel Hill now. And he would say, "Ben, which is the most important word in the sentence?" And to be funny, I would say the third and the fourth. He said, "No, it's the first and the last." And I began to write sentences. His nose was bleeding blood. His nose was bleeding blood. But it taught me, that the first sentence is important, the first paragraph, the last paragraph, the first chapter, the last chapter. And it was, I began to write stories about Sicily, and one was published in the Paris Review, number 10. That was the number, the issue was number 10. They're up to 270 now. And I got letters from publishers all over the country in England asking me if I was working on a novel. Of course, I said yes.
Of course. What else are you going to say?
And I wrote.
I can have it for you next Tuesday, right?
And that's when I wrote my first novel, The Seventh Saracen. And Coward McCann put it out. It was a subsidiary of, I think, Harper Collins or something like that. And that's the cover. I still have the cover, but I haven't got a copy of the book anymore.
Come on.
No, I haven't.
Ben.
On one of these websites, I found a place in, I think it was Montana or Wyoming. They said they have a copy of it, and I can get it for $95. So a friend of mine said he's going to get it for me. I said, okay.
That's tremendous irony in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So how many books have you written now?
Well, I think about 4 or 5 novels, 3 nonfiction, and that's about it. I forget them once I write them.
As I say before, you're going to do it till you get it right. How soon did you realize this was a real passion? Right from the beginning?
Well, I think in Paris, I still try to write, 2 hours every morning.
You do?
Yeah. I had to get my courses when I was teaching only in the afternoon and at night. So that I could spend those 2 hours writing in the morning.
It's easier for you first thing in the morning?
Yep. Yeah,
That's the way everybody develops a pattern, I guess.
Yeah.
And you still write 2 hours a day after all these years, after teaching creative writing, after doing it all these years. Yep. Is it a, like you said, your drawings were an exercise. Is writing for you an exercise, a catharsis?
No, it's it comes out of my experience. Like most of my books, my novels are on Sicily, and being torn in 2 directions. I mean, that's what it's all about. This last book, The Loss of the Miraculous, is about living here in Plattsburgh and the experiences here. With a lot of people think that they see themselves in it, but it's not true. It's all in my head.
Yeah. Just keep saying that.
Yeah.
So which one do you like the best? Is it always the latest one?
No, I think it's the first one. The first one made an impression on me, really. And
when you get that first novel done, you say, "Lord, I can do this."
Yeah. Well, also that some people remember. Some of my friends have read them all, and sometimes we get together at the coffee house, and they remember parts of it that they think are very funny. Some of the things I can't repeat here, so I won't tell you about them.
We'd like to, though.
Yeah.
That's great. So you've done the artwork, you've done the teaching. You came. Did you? Let me see now. After Paris, where did you go then?
Well, I came back here when, and that's when I got my job at Goddard College over in Vermont.
So you taught there a long time.
Yeah. But I couldn't take Goddard. I wrote a book about that called Down and Out in Academia.
Ooh.
Which was describing the difference between an experimental college like Goddard and a traditional college like here, you know. So a lot of people think they see themselves in that book, but it got me into trouble.
Did it really? It sounds to me, Ben, like you haven't really tried to avoid trouble all of your life, because half the fun is getting out of it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, like Harry Carmen told me at Columbia when the war broke out, the Korean War, he said, get over there before they blow it up. So off I went. You know, they weren't going to get me in the Army again and send me off to New Guinea again.
Amazing stories, but I bet you, when you were a young person and you were in Paris, you never dreamed you'd end up in northern New York State. It's amazing how many people who've done so many notable things have made their mark on Plattsburgh and Clinton County. I'm learning that all the time, from Parisian artists in the 1930s and 40s to Mr. Ben right here.
Well, you don't think of it, you know. You live for that moment that you're there, and I enjoyed it very much, and I still enjoy Plattsburgh very much. So I have good friends here, teach every once in a while, and it's I can't complain. Doesn't do any good.
No, you told me that when I first walked in and said, how are you doing? He says, I can't complain. We're going to move into another room. We're going to see where the heartbeat of this man is, where his computer is, where his books are, and then we're going to sit at his kitchen table, and we're just going to chew the fat. Sound good?
Good going.
All right,
okay.
Let's do it. There was a program on the radio when I was a youngster called Inner Sanctum Mystery.
Yes.
I don't know how much mystery there is in these four walls, but it certainly is your inner sanctum, isn't it, Ben?
Well, I spend a lot of time here, you know, and get my writing done, use my computer.
Did you start writing on a typewriter or by hand when you did your first novel?
By the way, I write everything out by hand, and then I put it in the
Good
computer or the typewriter. I can't write at the computer.
Really?
I can't.
You mean you can't think and write? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe that's it, yeah.
It's not that the keyboard is that complicated compared to a typewriter, but it just doesn't feel right composing.
Yeah, well, I started writing with a pencil and paper in the Paris cafes, you know, and
That's the way to do it if you're going to write.
And then I would put it on a typewriter. Now I put it in the computer, you know. The computer has been a big help with spell checks and all kinds of.
It does miracles for me, I guarantee you that.
Like on this book, which one, the Astoria, you know, when the editors would say, why don't you move chapter 3 to up to 6 or 7? Well, on a typewriter, can you imagine what that would be?
No.
With a computer, you can do it very easily. Just
You can do it very easily. I'm not very good at that cut and paste stuff.
No,
Yeah. But
Yes.
you're right. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
The editing process is so much better than it ever was before.
Yeah.
Even to correct erasures and spelling and, you know. So your original manuscripts look like a road map. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, it was all written out by hand, you know, and then put in on the ties. I used to have an old Royal typewriter.
Didn't we all?
Yeah. I'm giving my age away, but
Yeah, well.
you know it now. So.
I don't even mind. I don't even mind. We are where we are, and there's not much we can do about that part of it, Ben.
Yep.
Let's start at the beginning with the books. Have you got your first one here?
No, that's the thing. I think I told you that.
I thought you said you had the cover.
There's the cover.
There's the
over
cover.
there. The Seventh Saracen.
Look at that. Get that picture. Huh? Do you look at that every once in a while for a reference? And then go look for a mirror? Say, where have all the good times gone?
Where has the time gone?
How long was how many pages was that book?
Oh, it was about 300 pages.
I wonder if it's in libraries. Is it in libraries around
You
here?
might be able to get it at the college library or at the local library.
That'd be very interesting. I'm anxious to see.
Yeah. That's a shame that, as I say, my sister has a copy of it, and this friend of mine is going to buy that copy from Wyoming or somewhere for $95.
It's amazing what you can find on the internet, but to me it's almost a travesty that an author has to go searching on the internet for a copy of his own book. Oh gosh.
This is a picture of Bruno Caruso.
All right, let me hold this up here so we can get it. It's kind of a dark picture, but we can get it.
When I spent a year in Rome and I got to know him. And this is his painting that he let me use for the cover of Monday, Tuesday. It never comes.
The one that's actually on the wall, is that the original out there or print? Out there on your wall in your living room.
No, that's a copy of it.
All right, so what was the second book?
The second book was A Few Virtuous Men, this one.
Tell me about it.
It's the story of an American who returns to Sicily, gets into difficulty there, and how someone helps him to get out of the difficulty.
Why? I see the wry smile when he says gets into difficulty.
Yeah. Well, he's kidnapped and put down in a well, and
That's difficulty. Yep, that would do it for me.
And they try to ransom him because the guy who put him in the well has a son who is ill, and he needs money. And it's when he's in the well, he has all these recollections. I won't tell you how it ends.
Oh, no, you can't tell us how it ends.
You can go down to the corner bookstore. I think she has a few copies there.
She's amazing. We always go down and see Nancy when we're looking for things. What year would this be, Ben?
Let me check. I often 73.
Okay, 27 years ago.
Whoa. Where's the time gone?
Yeah, we keep saying that. All right.
Where's the time gone?
Oh,
time is home, and it has slipped away.
oh golly. All right. What was the next one?
I showed you these two books. Then there was La Storia, 5 centuries of the Italian-American experience that I did with Jerry Mangione.
All right.
And everyone says, oh, is that Chuck Mangione? No,
no, not the same guy.
that was his uncle.
Was it really?
Yeah.
They were related?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
But Jerry died soon after we finished the book, and I want to show you, too, that it was translated into Italian by a publishing company there. They really did a good job of it.
It's a neat old photograph. Boy, I'll tell you.
Did they get any No, they didn't get pictures of us or anything. Like some of these pictures are in that picture book, you know.
Oh, they are?
This one is.
Oh, those are great pictures.
And this is a memoir that I just finished, and it came out a couple of months ago. Sicily, the Hallowed Land. So you see, I've been writing about being torn in two directions all the time, Sicily and this country.
Is that a bad thing or a good thing?
Well, I think I went back there about 4 years ago, and I thought I was going to stay there for good and do my
You
writing
did? You
there.
almost made the move?
And I discovered I was an American, and I came back.
Isn't that
And
amazing?
I have no desire
To be an older adult and make finally make that distinction, huh?
Yeah.
So you came back here, but you still have stirrings. How could you help but be moved when you go over there?
Yeah, but the thing is, I have no desire to go back now. I think I've broken with that, and I'm writing more. This novel I'm working on now is more about being here and going to Paris and why people were going to Paris back in those days, you know.
Well, the world was a far different place, and Paris had a very different connotation in the 1930s and early 40s.
Oh, no, this was in the 50s when I was
50s?
50s when I went there. And I think a lot of it came from that it was the McCarthy period. And so many of the people that were over there were running away from the McCarthy period. And people in the cafes like the Select, there was that tradition where Hemingway hung out and all that. They would say, keep your mouth shut. There might be a FBI agent here. And they were really concerned about it, you know. People have forgotten that. You know, when I teach courses in the Italian-American experience and talk about Sacco and Vanzetti and the fear of communism and this in the McCarthy period, students don't know anything about it, you know.
Doesn't that, I don't know if it bothers you, but it must at the very least fascinate you that students of today, they don't have 9/10 of the true memories you have because they haven't lived through that period. They don't. Most of your students weren't even alive during the Vietnam War, never mind the Second World War.
Well, I keep thinking that, you know, I first got here, I had to sign a statement that I am not a member of the Communist Party, I wasn't and never will be, and blah, blah, blah. And the guy who, that was called the Feinberg Law. And what they do for him, they named a library after him.
Yeah.
I find that kind of ironic somehow.
Benjamin Feinberg, right?
Yeah.
Oh, boy. So your tenure here was a good one at Plattsburgh State.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much, and I taught also courses like films and history. I enjoyed teaching there very much. I liked the students, and I think some of them liked me.
You know, it's great to sit around with your old cronies, your friends who come from your time era. Not that I think it was that far removed, but it's also invigorating at times to work with young people, to talk with young people, and to sense that energy.
Very much so. Like this last course I gave, the Italian-American Experience, in the honors program, I had 14 people in there, and all of them had names like Smith, Jones, and there's a black kid in there, and I would say, why did you take the course? Well, my grandmother was Italian. My grandmother was Italian.
Don't you love it?
My grandmother, I asked the black kid, why did you take the course? My grandmother was Italian.
You gotta love it.
Yeah, and they did some wonderful papers. You know, they got photographs. They went back and interviewed their grandmothers and got photographs, and they wrote documents for their own families, you know, where they had come from, the whole experience. So it was a pleasure working with them.
Good for them and good for you. And I was going to ask you, how do today's college kids compare to the college kids when you first started teaching, or is there a comparison? Is it even fair to make a comparison?
I don't think you can compare it. Like the students of the 60s were very much politically involved, you know. And I remember some of them, I won't mention names, became administrators now at the college, and others became editors in Boston. They were very much involved with the politics of the country. They were wanting to read, to understand, to study. That energy somehow isn't what it used to be. They're good students now, but they haven't got that energy that was there in the 60s, you know.
You know, and if the energy is there, it's been tremendously transformed into many other kinds of directions.
Yeah.
But it's nice. I bet you it's wonderful when you do see a student that has this tremendous drive.
Very much so, yeah. We had, my last course I taught, one of the students brought in his grandmother, and we taped her observations about the war and that so many Italians were considered enemy aliens. And here was a woman that had 3 sons in the U.S. Army, and she was considered an enemy alien, you know.
Well, what happened to you when you told them you were brought up in Sicily?
Yeah, that's right. But
what happened to Japanese Americans?
But people don't know it, but there were camps that were set up, and Italians were sent there out in Salt Lake City, Seattle, Washington. And Joe DiMaggio's father, for example, who was a fisherman, could no longer fish. And he had to stay away from 15 miles away from the shore. I went back to...
Oh, come on.
Yeah. I went to, DiMaggio's parents had come from Sicily, a little town called Isola del Femmina. And I went back to Sicily to see that town. And I went to the town, I went to talk to the mayor. Do you know what his name was? DiMaggio. I'm not making this up, you know.
How could you make that up?
And I said, have you ever heard of Joe DiMaggio? Oh, never heard of him.
Isn't that amazing?
And it's a little town, it was a fishing town off of Palermo. And you could see where Joe DiMaggio's father had this idea of becoming a fisherman, just north of San Francisco. And when I was doing research on it, I interviewed people, and they said it was the oldest brother, and I forget his name now, who was the best ball player. But he never went into baseball because his father said there's no money in baseball. and he remained a fisherman. Whereas the others, as you know, who was it, Vince, Dom, and Joe, they all became ball players.
That's incredible. Did you ever get involved personally in sports as a youngster?
Oh, yes. I played football. That's why I have trouble with my legs now. I broke both legs over a period of 2-3 years. I played for the church team in Brooklyn. We used to play in a huge stadium. And I remember when I broke one leg, I was the fastest kid on the block. So they'd get in a huddle and say, give the ball to Benny. And I scored a couple of touchdowns. And then they got on me. One guy hit me high, one guy hit me low, and I heard the leg go.
Oh, boy.
I was in the hospital for a week. And the doctor said, well, you'll be all right now. He said, but you're going to feel it when you're older. And sure enough, yeah, begin to feel it now. I won't. In those days, they used to have the left halfback, the right halfback. Do they still have them?
They got halfbacks on both sides, sure.
But the quarterback wasn't that important in those days. It seemed to me, and I was the left halfback. And give the ball to Benny and we'll go.
So that wasn't necessarily a good experience if you broke both your legs.
Well, I enjoyed playing, and I played a lot of baseball also. But then I got into reading books, and off we went.
It's a good point for us to stop just for a moment and talk about reading books. Because as hard as it is for you and for me to understand, there are people who will view this program, here it is on the 29th day of September 2000, who haven't read a book this year.
Wow.
And if a week goes by that I don't finish a book, I feel as though I haven't had my breakfast.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I wonder, I found that many of the students don't read as much as the others, people of like 10, 15 years ago. And I don't know whether it's the computers and all these websites and television that's doing it, But I get the feeling there are more people writing now than reading.
Isn't that an interesting turn of events?
Yeah.
There certainly are more things to stimulate people, and there's a tendency toward passivity, I guess, and to sit back and let other people entertain us. At least when you're reading, you're participating, I feel, don't you?
Yeah, that's when I was teaching writing. I always told students that the important thing is to develop characters, a story, but the characters and their relationships are important. Because that's what we're interested in, is other people and how they relate to other people. And that's what keeps you reading in a way. You have a good storyline, characters, and relationships.
I have to always ask this question to anybody who writes. Does your creativity ever surprise you? Do you get into a book and say, whoa, where did that come from?
No, I don't think so. I think it surprises me. No, because I think I'm sort of always, the characters develop themselves. They tell me what to do,
Well, that's a little bit magical, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I've been doing it for years now, and I think the characters, in a way, tell you what to do. And that's the way it goes. Most people say, "Oh, that reminds me of somebody I know." I say, "Good," but it didn't. I didn't take it from people that I know. The characters develop themselves.
Once you establish it, then they unfold, don't they?
Yep, they certainly do.
That's amazing. I've always been fascinated by what people attribute that creativity to, you know. Is it divine inspiration? Do we wake up in a dream and have an idea for a book tomorrow morning? No. Or do we just write the first sentence and let it go?
Yeah, I think where mine came from, when I was a kid, the Italian family would get together. And there was always Uncle Luigi who would tell stories. And we kids would be under the table with a lit candle, and we had roasting spaghetti on it. And we pretended we were back in the West. Okay, Padre, let's go. And here was Uncle Luigi telling stories in Italian, and he would say, "Una volta c'era," once there was. And
Once upon a time, right?
Yeah, and I think that in many ways, when I began writing, I almost heard his voice, that, I would tell the story the way he told it. And he told some funny stories and some good
Italians
stories.
are great storytellers and always have been.
Well, they had storytellers in Sicily that made their living that way. They would go from town to town, stand in the square, tell stories, and then ask for money. And these were the legends. They would tell these stories that went back to ancient Greece. They would tell the story of a cardinal that had fallen into a well, and they couldn't get him out, so they sent a boy down there. And they said, "Can you find him?" He said, I found something." And the cardinal was wearing his hat, and he says, "He has horns. He has horns." But in Italian, to say he has horns, he's cuckold. And he said, "Okay, bring him up." So the boy thought it was a goat that was down there, but instead they bring him up and it was the cardinal. And that was the story that the storytellers would tell as they went from town to town. It was one of them, And then they would ask for money, and that's how they made their living. And so many of the Sicilian writers, like Luigi Pirandello, they got their habit of writing. And Sicily has a great tradition of writers. Two of their writers won Nobel Prizes. In a way, Sicily is like Ireland, its relationship to the North. And they've produced a lot of writers, from Pirandello, Elio Vittorini that I knew there, whose books were translated and turned into films and all of that. So that these writers sort of set an example, and there are a lot of young kids that are writing there to this day.
That's great. Do you still have how many family members back there? Any cousins?
I have a distant cousin that I rented an apartment from her when I was there. I thought I was going to stay, but I just didn't like it. I discovered I was American.
But you're still proud of your heritage.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Immensely so. You wouldn't be able to write about it all.
Well, I think one of the things that annoys me is that this image of Sicilians all being mafiosi. Like you get a program like The Sopranos. Where did they get that stuff? Have you ever watched The Sopranos?
I've never watched it, but I guess it's one of the most popular television shows that was ever on.
One of the students taped it and brought it into the class. And here is this Italian family with little kids around. They're using four-letter words all over the place. For one thing, that's a no-no. I mean, an Italian family would never do that. But the Sicilians or Italians are always portrayed as mafiosi. Whereas mafia began in this country. Organized crime existed long before the Italians came. A guy like Luciano comes over when he's 6 years old. Costello, when he was 8. Al Capone, he said, "What do you mean I'm Italian? I was born in Brooklyn." And there is a great anger among many Italian Americans about this image of Italians all being in organized crime. And my point in so many of my books is that organized crime began here. It wasn't brought over from anywhere else, you know. They had Irish gangs, and all the guys that I interviewed for the book said, look, as one man said, what gangy? He said, without a gangy, you were ninty, you were nothing. He said, if you didn't have a gang, you were nothing. And this was people I interviewed in Brooklyn, where I was brought up. I just remember the conflicts between Italian and Irish gangs, you know. So
we have an Italian-American club here. Have you been involved with that?
Oh, yes, I'm on the board of directors.
I should have known. How could that go without saying?
Yeah, we're having a meeting, a dinner at the barracks pretty soon. I'm on the nominating committee. I have to think about that, too. It's great to get together with them. It's really nice.
There are a lot of wonderful Italian families that have lived in northern New York for a long time, but we talk about the Irish coming here, and we talk about other people coming here, and but actually quite a few Italian families came here.
You know how they came up here? When I was interviewing people, there was they helped build the railroad coming up from New York all the way to Buffalo. So there was one man here in Peasleyville. I forget his name now.
That's my favorite place.
I interviewed him. He was 80, 90. I said, how did you get here? He said, I worked on the railroad. I got here. I didn't like the railroad. There was a job here. I got off, and he stayed. And that I followed that route all the way up. You know, in Syracuse, you find the same thing, all the way up to Buffalo. That's how they came. Came up working on the railroad. I've been working on the rail. And in Italian goes, where do you work, John? On the Delaware Lackawanna. Do you know that?
Oh, God. Is there anybody our age who hasn't sung that song from childhood on to the present time?
And they, they went all the way up to Buffalo, and there they worked in, they had some kind of industry up there, and then some of them went over to Hamilton, Ontario, where they worked in, I forget, they produced some kind of steel works, you know. And there's a big Italian community in Hamilton, Ontario, and in Buffalo, in Rochester. And it was the railroad that got them up there. Yeah.
Railroad meant a lot to this area. We've interviewed some people who've written some wonderful books and collected some amazing photographs of the beginnings of the railroad. And we've traced life in the North Country back to periods before the railroad came. It made an unbelievable difference here and everywhere.
Yeah. Well, the railroad made an impression on the Italian immigrants. They all worked on it, and that's how they found new places. And then they usually would ask someone to come from Italy. Usually that's how marriages were arranged, you know. They would ask a woman to come over, and marriages were arranged, and they ended up in Syracuse or Plattsburgh or Buffalo.
The name Syracuse doesn't have French origin, I guarantee you that.
No, it's Syracuse in Sicily. I don't know how these names got here. You know, I often wondered, why do we have Rome, we have Naples in New York? There are so many Italian-sounding names.
Let's pause for a minute while you answer your phone. Well, we've changed our venue. We're now in the kitchen. I always like the kitchen because it's closer to the cupboards, closer to the pantry. We got some wonderful books in front of us. First of all, most of the books that we've talked about, what else can we say about your previous books? Anything else you want to add?
Well, I think... I'm sorry I haven't got my first novel. That's out in
You'll get it.
Wyoming.
You'll get it. We'll have a party when you finally get a copy of it.
But this was my second novel, A Few Virtuous Men. And then there was Monday, Tuesday, Never Comes Sunday, which was another novel.
Why the title? Why that? I love that title.
I forget.
People say, why did I do, I like to draw too, and people say, why that? And I'll say, I have no idea. Somebody said, I write a little column, as you know, in the newspaper, and somebody said this morning, what can I expect this coming Sunday? I said, I wrote that last week. I have no idea what it's all about.
Well, because the little boy in the story, it's his grandfather who teaches him about the different days, and he tells him this is Monday, and he does it with his fingers, and he never got to Sunday for some reason. So the boy remembers.
There's a message there, I think.
Monday, Tuesday, and he never got to Sunday.
As a writer, do you feel as though you write very differently from when you wrote your first books now?
Oh, yes, I think there has been a change, and I can't say what it is, but people have told me that it has changed.
When it happens to you, it's subtle. It's like watching your child grow and then having Uncle Charlie see him for the first time in 5 years. You hope it's for the better. You hope you have the wisdom of the sages and the ages.
Well, I keep writing because I want to tell these stories. I don't think about anything else, really. Like, I don't think about, am I going to get reviews? And one of the things that Italian-American writers, I belong to the Italian-American Cultural Club, and I get emails from a lot of other writers, and they're always complaining that Italian-American writers don't get the publicity that other writers get, except for guys like Mario Puzo, and everybody's angry at him because he gave us this image of mafia. And I'm constantly, this must be, excuse me.
Okay, sure. See, Carol came home and we greeted her off camera. Now she's gone in to make a couple of phone calls. She brought, I'll tell the whole world, she brought some old bagels for the birds and her little peanuts, and we're talking about protecting the lives of all the God's little creatures around here. And wait a minute, what's with this yoga thing?
Well, I do yoga once a week. It keeps me limber. But
You better hope so.
what I tell Nancy, who does the gives us the instructions, I said, well, I'll do what I can, and what I can't do, I just won't do. Like I can't rock with my feet over my head and touch the other side of the wall or something, you know. So I just do what I can.
Can you picture that? There would be an ambulance by the door so fast.
So I do what I can.
That's great.
And it keeps me going. And I get my walking done. I walk every day.
That's probably why you're still around.
Knock wood, as they say. I try to keep active as much as I can.
You enjoy the interaction with other human beings. You would never make a good hermit. I
don't think so. No, that's why I enjoyed teaching. It was a relationship with the students. You know, it was something that I enjoyed doing, and I still have my friends here that I have coffee with, and have my Wednesday night dinners with a number of my friends that I've been having dinners now for a good 20 years.
You know, there's something else I have to mention. First of all, we had to emphasize reading in the hope that some young people are watching this who haven't read that book, and some older people too. They should discover the beauty of reading and see what is and was in other people's minds. But it's the fine art of conversation. Mm. That's why you enjoy going to the coffee shop.
Yeah.
That's why you get together at dinner with your friends. And that's why, I have nothing against any of the media. Television is a wonderful medium. Newspapers are wonderful medium. But sometimes sit down, have a conversation with your family around the family group, like those great Italian storytelling sessions, and listen to what other people have to say. That intercourse of the minds, is beautiful for people.
But we've lost a lot of that. I think
Too much of it.
When I was a kid, I always remember dinners being a very sociable thing. And when other kids were getting castor oil or something to open their appetites.
Believe me, I remember that castor oil.
I would be given a tablespoon of wine, you know. But there were never any drunkards around. I mean, we all drank wine, but there weren't any alcoholics that I remember as a kid. But eating was always a very sociable thing. The grandparents, the grandchildren, my parents. But then I guess we all lived in these tenement houses, you know, on the Lower East Side, so that was possible to get together with people. It was very easy. My grandfather lived on First Street and 2nd Avenue, I think it was, on the, and they had, we could very easily meet there. You know. And it was a way of life that, in a way, has disappeared. I mean, most of the kids here, if they want to go see their grandparents, they have to go downstate or over to Ohio or someplace, you know.
Yeah, that's true. People spread out more than, you know, neighborhood has taken on a whole new meaning in recent years, hasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I guess that's what I've been writing about. It was that community that I grew up in, you know. I was brought up in an Italian Jewish neighborhood, and I still remember sitting on the stoop and listening to these old Jewish men tell stories. And again, maybe that's where some of my writing came from. And I still remember one phrase. There was this one man who told stories, and there was sort of a cuss word. It went, "Aladina should fall out, and that one should have a headache." Translated, all of your teeth should fall out except one, and that should have a headache. And I remember it. I must have been that high, you know. And I still remember Aladina. And there are some of the cuss words in Jewish that I still remember, and I won't repeat. Do you know what a schmuck face is?
No.
I won't tell you.
Okay. But we use it freely anyway, the word anyway.
Or a putz face.
Yeah. Oh,
schmuck.
my. So that's interesting. So you learned all these Yiddish phrases too, huh?
Yeah. I learned all of these things, and I remember on East 4th Street. It was East 5th Street in Manhattan, and across the street there was a Jewish temple, and beside it there was a house of prostitution. You see, I was that high, and the kids, we used to go in and look there and discover the difference between boys and girls.
Way to learn about the birds and the bees.
But, you know, the Lower East Side in those days was a pretty rough place. I'm not aware of it, but, you know, I wasn't aware of it as a kid. But when I read back at it, that was a rough time, you know. And I remember during Prohibition, everybody was making wine and whiskey in their own places. And I helped my father make wine because we liked wine. And I still remember churning the thing to make the wine.
That's amazing. Prohibition, of course, played a big role in much of American life during that time period, and was big here because of the efficacy of Lake Champlain and and some of the trails up through the woods and back roads and old Packards and Buicks and early Cadillacs and revenuers running after them on horseback. And
well, it was so easy to go up there and have a drink and come back with whatever you wanted to bring back if you could get away with it.
Well, you know, I've written quite a bit about the people who are our age who remember back during that time period and how they could go up across the border, and now we see young kids doing the same thing these days because of the age differential between 18 and 21.
But no one paid much attention to it in this neighborhood in Brooklyn. I remember that my uncle had a grocery store, and he made his own wine, and he would sell wine in the back room. Cops would come in and sit down and have a drink with him, you know, and he made quite a bit of money that way. But no one was going to stop drinking wine because, the government said, wasn't that a ridiculous thing, though?
Right.
Yeah. Just to have a glass of wine was against the law.
Things do look ludicrous in retrospect sometimes, including our own lives, or portions of them anyway.
Yeah.
But there are things to be embarrassed about that happen in our country today. We love our country, and you said you're an American.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that we can't say we don't like something that's happening.
Yeah, very
at a
much
given
so.
time. And prohibition, wow.
Yeah. No. Most of my family and relatives, they made their own wine, and we always had wine on the table. I think, as I said, I was given wine as a way of opening my appetite, as they said. Have a tablespoon of wine.
And now what do they tell us today? A little glass of red wine?
No, it's good for you. I still have my little glass of red wine.
A little cup of green tea and a little glass of red wine.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. All right, let's move on here. We've talked about most of these books. This is a beauty. Tell me what the genesis is of this book.
Well, when I had published La Storia, this publishing house called me and they said if I wanted to write the text to a picture book on the Italian Americans, because they had done some on the Chinese Americans and the Irish Americans, and they wanted to do something on the Italian Americans.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, and I wrote the text, and they collected the pictures that were they're just incredible. The pictures go from places in Italy where the immigrants came from, all the way, as I said, to Joe DiMaggio at the end, and all the contributions that Italian Americans have made to this country.
Did you see the pictures before you started to write, or
No.
did they match?
They matched the pictures to what I wrote.
And they're spectacular.
They really are. It's a wonderful book, and
I'm sure the text is spectacular, too.
well, most people I've talked to about say, well, I'm going to get one for my grandmother for Christmas. They think it's such a great thing for a Christmas present. I said, yep.
Well, that's what people do with these books, and unfortunately, the grandmother says, isn't that nice sometimes, and it stays on the coffee table, but this is wonderful. How long did it take you to put it together?
Oh, about a year, but I had my old notes from doing this book, so I could, because it had to be different from this, and I had to get permission from HarperCollins to use some of the material that I had in here.
A layman don't understand the mechanics of how that works, but there's a lot of dogs eating dogs back there, and so you have to make sure you get the right permission, huh?
Mm-hmm.
But you were happy with the end product, I know you were.
Very much so. It's beautiful. I don't know how they got all those pictures together.
All right, always the best conversations occur when the camera's not running and the tape recorder's not running, and we've covered a variety of subjects as we're taking a breather here. I want people to know that there is structure to this book. It has a first chapter and a middle chapter and an ending chapter, but there's each chapter has a subject matter.
Yeah, so we begin with a short history of Italy, where the people came from, and then what before the explorers came to this country, and we talk about Columbus and Verrazano, and then why the immigrants came. What is the Mezzogiorno, as they call the southern part of Italy, where most of the immigrants came from. And then we go to the painful passage, the crossing of the ocean, what Ellis Island was like, and then a discussion of many of these people who made money on the people who came over. They were called padroni, or bosses. That was another word for and then the section on finding the way in America, the family, the importance of the family, that the family was a very important part of the lives. Then the festivals, the festa, And then a closer look at how people made their living, whether it was in the mines or whether it was in the clothing industry. They had a great role in that. And then we look at each city from Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, the South, the West. There was I've been asked to come out to Dallas, Texas to give a talk sometime in November. There's an Italian-American community there. And how they got there, many of them were these radicals that came from Italy, socialists, and they founded socialist parties in Texas. Can you imagine that? But they were very quickly turned into Republicans.
Oh, boy.
Because when L'Astoria came out, I gave a reading in Barry, Vermont, where there's a large Italian-American community. The quarry workers were set up by the Italians who came there. And I had to tell them that they were the radicals who came. They were socialists and anarchists. They couldn't believe it because they're all Republicans there.
Isn't that beautiful?
So that the coming to this country really changed the Italians who came here. And of course, there was discrimination that they faced in the Promised Land. Words like Dago and Guinea and Wap, what do they mean, you know? Of course, most people know that WAP came from without papers, you know. I forget about Guinea, but Dago, they say, came from the fact that the Italians were working down in pits, and the Irish bosses up there, the Italians would shout up, where did they go? They thought it was time to quit. And that's how apparently the word began, that they would call them...
Who would ever guess it was something that simple, huh?
Yeah, there the Dagos down there.
Isn't that amazing?
And of course, there's a closer look at the Black Hand and the Mafia. As I've said often, that it wasn't brought here from Sicily, but these organizations began here. And if you remember, in Yugoslavia, wasn't it World War I that began by a Black Hander who killed the Archduke Ferdinand? The Black Hand existed in Europe and existed in this country. And then, of course, conclude with the Italian Americans make their mark, and we talk about all the men like Giannini and the Mondavi vineyards, and people like, of course, Frank Sinatra, Francis Ford Coppola, and the likes, and painters like Fasanello.
You know, when you just said that, and we're going to get into this picture because I promised people the color version of the cover, and just as you were speaking about Italian Americans, I was transported instantly back to my childhood in Westchester County in a place called Thornwood, New York. Close it up.
Pick it up.
Pick it up. Oh. And I was taken back to we lived on a side hill, and there was a little house and a studio behind mine, only 10, 12 steps away. And the man's name was Fiorello.
Don't tell me it was LaGuardia.
No, I don't think they were related. But he was a sculptor and a painter. And as a very small child, he would have great patience. And I would walk into a studio which had a dirt floor while he was doing his work with lots of light, lots of glass, and lots of light. And he died when I was a small child, but I never forgot his influence in taking time to explain the busts, who these people were, and how he was inspired. I've never really forgotten it, I guess, but you took me there.
Good.
And that's beautiful. I guess we all have have memories of one kind or another, and there are good ones and bad ones. All right, what is this really?
Well, this is Mulberry Street, and if I could show you, one of these side streets was Christie Street, where I was born. Mulberry Street, the Italians called it the Street of the Jews, La Strada delle Giuda, because most of these push carts and whatnot were Jewish people who began that tradition. But Mulberry Street was where all the immigrants landed and lived in these tenements. And I remember people sleeping out there on these hot summer. Can you imagine what New York City was like on a hot summer night? People just slept out on the fire escapes. I don't know whether you see one of them there, but the fire escapes were like the porches of the houses, you know.
How they ever got this picture colorized? It was black and white because it was taken very close to
1900.
1900,
Yeah.
100 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, they did a magnificent job, and
Well,
I suppose
that's the cover is in black and white, the original.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how they colored that.
Well, if they can colorize movies, they can probably do it by computer, colorize this picture. It's absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Had you ever seen that photograph before?
No, I hadn't. No, I didn't see any of these. I gave them the script, and they collected these. It took them a good year to collect the pictures.
Oh, it did?
You know, it was this Corolla fellow that got all the pictures together. I was in touch with him by phone and all that, but I only got this about 2-3 weeks ago.
Oh, you did. But it's in the stores now, isn't it?
No, it won't be in until
this is a preview?
Yep, until the end of the month. I think the end of October, they said they would have it in the stores.
This could sell you 7 or 8 copies. This could be a big deal, Ben, just showing it on here.
Yeah.
I don't want to give it all away, but some of these pictures are just so neat.
Yeah, well, these are paintings of some of the Italian artists, you know.
Great stuff. Anyway, you had fun writing it, but then you had fun looking at it.
I still look at the pictures. They're fascinating. It must have taken them, well, a good year to get all these pictures together.
Have you ever done this kind of a book before? This is a new experience?
New experience for me. You know.
You're going to have to go on the road doing all the book signings. And
Yeah. Well, we'll see what we can do. I'll start here. If I get to Dallas.
Don't count on much with this little program, but we'll be just as enthusiastic as we possibly can. And you say it'll be on the stands in
End of October.
End of October. Which of your other books are still in print?
Well, we have this Sicily, the Hallowed Land, and then there's La Storia, that you still can get up at Walden's or at the corner bookstore there downtown in Plattsburgh. What else? That's about all. These two.
What's the most successful? Have either one of them been very successful?
Probably La Storia was the most successful. That was reviewed in the New York Times and all over, and I still get little checks, very little checks. And also, The Seventh Saracen was reviewed all over. It was published in England also. That was my first novel.
Well, how did you make that breakthrough? How did you get in the door?
Well, I don't know. It was the publishers that did it all. I think, like with these books, it was published by Tundra up in Montreal, and they had an office here in Plattsburgh. They were good about seeing that it got reviewed and pushed around. Whereas, like this book, Sicily, the Hallowed Land, is a small publishing company down in New York. He hasn't done anything with it, you know, so the book sort of disappears. So I have to publicize it myself. But it was something I simply wanted to see in print. This was a memoir of everything that we've talked about today, you know.
We'll read the book anyway, man.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes you just want to do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of things we do, of course, most of the things Calvin and I do, we don't get any money for. But some things you want to do.
Yeah.
And you feel better for having done them.
Well, that's why I did that, I had called it, to begin with, Sicily the Hollow Land. But the publisher said, Hollow Land makes it sound empty. I said, well, that's the point. That when the ancient Greeks got there, they found that it was such a productive land, that everything grew, that they said this place must be hollow, So he said, no, we have to change it to the hallowed land. So we changed it. But Sicily for a long time was fought over because it was such a rich country agriculturally. And later they discovered sulfur there also. That made it very a rich country. But just about everybody who controlled Sicily controlled the Mediterranean world. When Rome was an empire, it was Roman. When the Greeks were a great empire, it was Greek. When the Carthaginians and the Arabs were important, it became Arabic. When the Normans were important, they controlled Sicily and controlled the Mediterranean. So that's what makes Sicily a fascinating place, that all of these people have left remnants of themselves there, Like the town where my folks came from, my grandfather came from, is called Racalmuto now. But the origins was Arabic. It was Rahalmo. When the Arabs arrived, they said, this is a dead city. And that's what it means in Arabic. Rahalmot is dead city. But now it's Racalmuto. And so many writers have come from that little town. This guy, Leonardo Sciascia, who was a well-known writer in Italy, and they made films of his books in France. He came from this little town. So that the tradition of writing is still there, And I think maybe that's where I came from too, I don't know.
That's very interesting. So you think it's built in, huh? It's in the genes, as they say.
Well, when you read about it and you say, well, Luigi Pirandello, this playwright, that his plays are still being put on. It was a Nobel Prize winner in literature. You wonder, what did he write? And I began to read his stuff and all the other writers that came from that area. They're just incredible.
Do you still read in Italian?
I can read Italian, but I don't read Italian anymore.
I just wondered. Now, did you learn to speak French fluently while you were in Paris?
Oh,
obviously.
Yes. I wrote my thesis in French.
Did you? Of course you would be.
Yeah. No, I still read French and listen to the French stations. And
Do you tolerate Canadian French? Because that had to be a little culture shock when you came back from Paris.
Well, it's just another accent, I think you find...
it's more than an accent.
Well, like in Italy, you have all these various accents.
Oh, sure.
So it's the same thing with the French. You go down to southern France and they have they'll say, où est ta femme? Où est ta femme? Where's your wife, Whereas in French, you're supposed to say, où est ta femme? But of course, the French Canadian have been influenced by their contacts. They still have phrases that go back to the 17th century, and then influenced by the English. So I have French friends up there, and they'll say, "Oh, ça c'est fun." I say, "Fun? What is that in French?"
Isn't that amazing?
Ça c'est fun. But a lot of the English words are. Or you can go to Sicily now and you see the influence of America there. The kids wear bull T-shirts, and New York Yankees caps. And I taught them the expression, take it easy, take it easy. And there are all of these kids that go around now saying, take it easy, take it easy.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? Take it easy sounds like an Italian phrase anyway, doesn't it?
Take it easy, take it easy. But, one of the things about Sicily was that the man-woman relationships are still kept separate. They have streets where the women walk and where the men walk.
Still?
But wait a while. This was in the time of my generation and my father. I remember being introduced to a young woman and in my cousin's house, and she would kiss me on both cheeks. If I saw her in the street, she wouldn't even look at me.
Wow.
Nowadays, the kids go up the hill, they're holding hands and kissing Chicago Bulls.
Okay.
Forget about it. You know.
Okay. Yeah.
It's changing. It's changed. It's not changing. But you know, I often the idea of a woman was looked upon simply as a way of transferring property from one generation to another. So she had to be a virgin. You see, that was very important. And it was a medieval tradition. You know, it existed all over Europe, but it remained there for a long time.
Well, let's talk a little bit more. When the camera was off before, we talked about discrimination, not just of the Italians, but the various different groups that came here to the North Country and elsewhere. Our country has been, we could do a treatise on discrimination of the various people who emigrated here, couldn't we?
Very much so. I think, as I mentioned, the Irish were so discriminated against that in Boston they used to have signs in public places, no Irish permitted here. And when the Italians came, particularly when they went in other places, they didn't have opportunities for any kind of jobs. They had to work in the pits. And of course, the expressions like WAP and Guinea came about. I think I may have mentioned that WAP was without papers. Yeah. And possibly that's where that whole image of Italian gangsters came about. It was a way of discriminating against them, you know. That you think of, who was it? I think it was Geraldine Ferraro. It was a wonderful woman, and when she was running for some office, they discovered that her grandfather was somehow involved with crime. They either invented this, and essentially she lost the election because of that, you know. And here we lost a good person. That, in a way, was a way of discriminating against people, Italians anyway. And I think it was up in Rochester when I was doing research for La Storia. I think it was what's that camera?
Kodak?
Kodak, yeah. That was a big company up there. And if you went to apply as they saw an Italian name, they would rip it up. That's what some of the people I interviewed up there, they would rip up the thing, get out of here, don't watch it. So that there was real discrimination in that sense. You know.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And no one said anything about it. That was the thing. If you did something like that today, wow, you'd be in trouble.
Yeah, and the word discrimination has taken on different meanings down through the years, and we've talked about how things were when we were children in the neighborhoods and organizations and how we referred to different ethnic groups. We talk about other people, other countries, China, etc., and their human rights problems, but we're still battling here in this country every day, aren't we?
Yeah, very much so. I think that... and it's a tradition that we have here, all these immigrant groups coming in and being threatened by the other group that's coming in, you know. That, I think, will always go on. When the Italians arrived and tried to get jobs on the docks, the Irish kept them out, you know. And this was in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Now there have been many intermarriages between Irish and Italians.
You know, you started to do some interviews some time back, and I wish the local newspaper had followed through with that original concept of interviewing people and say, how did we get here? Or
No one came to Plattsburgh. And I interviewed 4 or 5 people, starting with Drew from Anthony's Restaurant. And
Drew Sabella.
Yeah. And they have some interesting stories to tell. And I keep asking some of the editors there, when are you going to start publishing them? And
maybe we'll put a little bug in the ear again. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Isn't that how very often our conversations start?
Absolutely.
How did you end up in Plattsburgh?
Yeah.
You know, how did you end up?
That almost everybody that I talk to has a story to tell. And there's hardly anyone that I know. They say, are you from Plattsburgh? No, I came from someplace else, you know.
Even though we've been here for 40 years, you know.
Yeah. Well, I came when I liked the whole North Country area of Vermont and this area, and I drew the circle when I wanted to leave Goddard College, and one of the places that was in the circle was Plattsburgh. And I came here for an interview, and they said, well, you have the job if you want it. And I started teaching French history and European history for the next 25 years.
But people do that because of the reputation, because they were brought here in the service, in the Air Force, a lot of people. And other people have told me we were on vacation and we liked it there.
Yeah.
And one other person who was in academia said to me, well, we didn't know where we want to settle down, so we just drove around. And they drove through Vermontville on Route 3 on the way up toward Bloomingdale and Saranac Lake, and said, both of them, they looked at each other and said, this is it. Yeah. And that was it.
Yeah. Well, the other is another person I interviewed was Perat's Garage, Lee, and he had come, his folks had come from England in 16-something, but out, you know, in the Boston area. And they didn't get here, and they became sharecroppers. But he didn't get here until he opened up his garage here. You know, that's how he came to Plattsburgh. And there are a lot of the air base brought a lot of people here.
Brought a lot of people here, and it did very interesting things. And I don't suppose anybody's ever written a book about that. But the cultural changes that all kinds of changes began when they started building that air base. Yep. And when they started putting missile sites in the early 1960s in this area, thousands of people from General Dynamics Astronautics came here, and that changed the face of things for many different reasons. The kids started going to school here. Same thing with the air base people. The children, you know, good athletes from big cities. All kinds of things happened back in those days that changed what Plattsburgh is all about today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's the closing of the base, you know, made people leave the area too. I think that was the other thing I discovered in interviewing people, that the base kept them here for a while, but then they left. You know.
It's interesting because we used to say we have such a wonderful place, you know, the quality of life is so good here in northern New York that many of the people who were stationed here retired and remained here. And that's true of some of them, but some people did move away when the air base closed. That was a tremendous trauma for a lot of people.
And I wish that there is so much valuable, I don't know what the word is, not valuable, but beautiful sites on that air base. Oh, if you drive through it, the buildings are beautiful. So much could be done, should be done with it, you know.
And hopefully
we'll get it done.
And hopefully will be done. There are people with dreams. We just spent, actually, in real time, a week or so ago, they held a reunion for Champlain College. You talked about the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. This college was created for people who came out of the service, out of the Second World War. They started a college on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, right around the old base oval. Yeah. That parade ground was the quad. Yeah. And these people came back, almost 100 of them, in their 70s, mostly in their mid-70s now. And we got together and told old war stories for a long time. But these people credit a great deal of their success on being able to go to college here on the GI Bill. So
well, I gave courses at the air base through the college, you know, and I remember I'd give a night course, and I found it so difficult to get discussion from them. They were all sitting at attention on their seats.
Loosen up, guys.
Yeah,
At ease.
I said, come on, we want to have some discussion. And I couldn't get anything. They wanted to hear a lecture, take notes, and off they went, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Listen.
they were good students, so.
I got to tell you, our tape is just about run out. But Ben Morreale,
Morreale.
I'll never do it right. Thank you so much for finally allowing us to come into your home for a couple hours and find out what makes you tick. You're a most fascinating person. I hope you never lose that twinkle in your eye.
What a responsibility.
Yeah, well, get the violin out, right?
Okay.
Did you ever play a musical instrument?
No, but I always wanted to play harmonica. I never got around
Did
to
you
it. I
really?
might take it up now.
I think this is about it. Thanks so much for doing this. Thanks so much for the contribution you've made to our community and to all those thousands of lives that you've touched by getting them in the classroom and inspiring.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed most of it. Like everything, you know, it was really a good time. I enjoyed being in Plattsburgh. I enjoyed teaching at the college, and I enjoyed doing this with you. Thank you very much.
Keep writing. Keep doing all the things you do. We love you. Have a great day. And listen, who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.
Okay.